Hi, welcome to the fourth video in the series on citizen-led assessments, which is a technical training module designed by the PAL network for the What Works Hub on global education. So far, hopefully you have seen the three previous videos in this module, and so far, hopefully you are familiar with what citizen-led assessments are, how you design a citizen-led assessment, and how you conduct a citizen-led assessment in practice. In this video, we wanted to touch upon the common assessment, which is a special type of citizen-led assessment that has been used by the PAL network, but also has been used globally so far. My name is Rastee Chaudhry. I am the assessment manager at the PAL network, and I am an assessment specialist here talking to you about what our assessment portfolio looks like. So before we talk about what it is that common assessments are, it's important to lay the groundwork on why common assessments are needed and why they emerged as a special type of CLA. As I'm sure you're aware, based on the videos prior to this one, members of the PAL network have been conducting CLAs since 2005 across their context, so across South Asia, East, West, and Southern Africa, and the Americas. And have been using the CLA model to measure what it is children know at the very foundational level, according to what they should know as per their national curricula. While national curricula is one benchmark to look at, another benchmark that countries need to consider are also global education goals. And so, for example, the Sustainable Development Goals lay out a multitude of goals under SDG 4, which look at education. And so these are goals that countries should strive to meet in order to promote sustainable development in their countries. Such global education goals then come with associated quality targets and education targets that help us measure how countries are doing with regards to the goals that they plan on meeting. An example of such an education quality target is SDG 411A, which looks at the proportion of children in grades 2 and 3 who are achieving at least minimum proficiency level in reading and mathematics. And then, so having indicators such as these ones, which are measuring, for example, children in grade 2 and 3 and their level of literacy and numeracy, for example, these then create pressure to participate in existing international and regional assessment programs. Now, most international and regional assessment programs are based on models and methods that emerged in the context of global North countries, which have characteristics that are often very different from those in global South countries. For example, in global North countries, we have decades of universal enrollment, we have comprehensive records of all schools in the countries, and we have, for example, many parents who are literate and are able to support children's learning outcomes, which is, again, in stark contrast to the context that we see in global South countries. Another difference is that in global North countries, assessments look at a specific level of performance, which does not generate enough actionable evidence for us in global South countries where children are generally at a much lower performance level. So we need to be measuring much lower level of skills to see what it is that children do and do not know and where we can adequately support. Common assessment is then a term used by the PAL network to refer to the same assessment format and the same assessment items being used across country contexts to promote rigorous cross-country comparisons and learning. These assessments, in difference to the ones that have been designed by the Global North, are designed exclusively by and exclusively for the Global South countries. They are tailored to the realities of Global South context and allow for comparisons across borders for cross-border learning and growth. This is, again, not to say that these assessments cannot be used in Global North settings. They most certainly can, but you, again, have to look at which one is best suited for your needs. And so it depends on what kind of measures of learning it is that you want to collect. So what exactly are common assessments? And how do they fit in with this larger CLA conversation that we've been having together so far? Common assessments are, well, as the title suggests, are a special type of citizen-led assessment. They build upon the CLA model in that they are simple to use and they are scalable tools that measure foundational literacy and numeracy skills. These tools are very similar to traditional CLAs in that they are administered orally and one-on-one with each child, so they do not assume any literacy skills, and they are conducted by trained citizen volunteers, very in line with the CLA model. The assessments, again, are also administered in households so that they capture both in and out of school children, and they're representative at the enumeration area level. Enumeration area level, by the way, is equivalent to a district in certain countries. Different terminology is used in different locations, so we are using the enumeration area terminology. But all this in mind, the model of common assessments is very similar to the citizen-led assessment models. At the same time, common assessments do have some unique features that build upon the CLA model, but then are fit to the purpose that they're created for. The common assessment has a common tool that is used across all countries, which has exactly the same items that are collectively designed and then carefully translated to each country context and language. I place emphasis on the carefully translated because a lot of work is done in even testing the translations to make sure there is no country diff, to make sure that the items are operating exactly the same across different countries, and to make sure that there is no interaction between language and item. This again helps to keep everything common and to help us talk about results in a central and more comparative manner. The item banks in common assessments are also far more extensive than traditional CLAs. So as I'm sure you're aware, CLAs measure very smaller subset of what children are supposed to know because they're supposed to be a very quick measure just to get a temperature check on what it is that people know in the country context. But the common assessment cover a larger range of domains, and also the items are far more robust than those in traditional CLA model. This is because all items under the common assessments and the common assessment item bank, which is one of our prized possession, is quantitatively tested. So it has psychometric testing using IRT and classical test theory to make sure that item properties are functioning in a very predefined and a very set and rigorous manner. And at the same time, all items are also qualitatively reviewed to make sure that we are able to administer them across country contexts in a very standard and common way, and to make sure that there are no problems in terms of the understanding of what items are. Another deviation and unique feature of the common assessment is that the common assessment item banks and tools are aligned to a global proficiency framework, which is one that has been defined by UNESCO, and the minimum proficiency levels. And so these tools do not report on individual country curricula, but rather on a global curricula, which then allows us to have the same tool used across country context and allows us to talk at a more comparative and global manner. Secondly, common assessments have common administration procedures. The exact same administration procedures are used across contexts. They have centrally designed training and administration practices. Everything is to be done exactly the same way, no matter what country you're in. And so even the trainings, for example, the first tier of all trainings are delivered by the same people. And then the second tier is then delivered by trained country representatives. They also use centrally designed quality assurance practices to make sure that data is being collected in the right manner and to make sure that we have a similar level of trust in data. And then all data is managed and analyzed centrally as well. This then allows us to draw analytical comparisons between countries and regions for cross-border sharing, which is then, again, another unique feature of common assessments that we aren't able to do with traditional CLAs. The exception to the commonality of items and commonalities of tools is for country-specific items. And so that is the asterisk you see on the page. The idea behind this is that language is a much harder thing to measure in a very common manner, especially when different languages are involved with the same tool. So what we have done to counteract that that basis that we have is that we have country-specific items and we have international items. And country-specific items are really used to capture language variations. So the methods of learning languages differ across different languages. And so country-specific items really capture those language variations, but then are anchored with the international items to bring them to a common scale and to bring them to a comparable area. There are also design variations within common assessments, and these can emerge from a variety of things, but are really baked into the common assessment framework. So, for example, there are different ways to measure numeracy and language and literacy common tools. For example, numeracy, you will have the exact same tool across all countries, but for language and literacy, as I just explained, you have your international items and you have your country-specific items, and then you're anchoring them together to report at a global scale. There are also variations that result from paper-based versus digital assessments, which I'll talk a bit more about in a bit. And there are also variations that result from sampling by region. So even though the similar sampling framework is used, there are, again, always going to be some form of variation. And so these are variations that are baked into common assessment practices and don't really interact with the results being reported at a global scale, but are caveats to keep in mind. So with that, let's talk a bit about the common assessment portfolio at the PAL network and use these as illustrative examples of how common assessments work in practice, but also use these to really understand what kind of assessments are out there that can be used. So PAL Network first started designing common assessments in 2018. The members came together and realized there was a need for such a common assessment so that we can have learnings across border. The members at the PAL Network came together and designed the ICAN, which is the International Common Assessment of Numeracy. And it was designed as a proof of pilot and kind of a first administration of this new idea. The first pilot and proof of concept of ICAN was conducted in one district each in 13 countries in 2019. And then a second round was then conducted in 7 countries in 2022 and 2023. The idea behind that being that we had then a pre and post pandemic benchmark with which to compare common assessment results and with which to see how the common assessment is held up over time. The ICAN item bank was extensively developed. A lot of work went into how the items were developed. A lot of work went into making sure that item properties were functioning a similar way. And a lot of work went into designing this common framework for measuring learning across countries. At the same time, because the PAL network is a network of different organizations, it was a great opportunity for our members as well to start working with common assessment practices and start ensuring that all assessment and data is collected in a common manner so that we can begin reporting results at, for example, regional or international levels and discussions. Based on the ICAN, then, we then developed the PAL ILANA, which is the PAL Early Language Literacy and Numeracy Assessment. The PAL ILANA was an extension of the ICAN item bank, but instead of just numeracy, ILANA also incorporated language and literacy, which was a far more complicated procedure and required a lot of work, but again, was just a natural evolution and a natural next step of what needed to be done. PAL ILANA is a digital multiple stage adaptive assessment that is actually conducted on tablets. It was developed and is tested in 12 countries. There have been 3 quite rigorous field trials that have been conducted, and the assessment goes into the field shortly for data collection. The reason we say it is a multiple stage adaptive design is that this item bank of ILANA is so extensive and so vast that we have created different pathways in the assessment. So we can measure just how much or just how little children know by making the test easier or harder based on how children are performing. ILANA and ICAN 1.0 were then extended into what we are now calling ICAN 2.0 and ICARE. So ICAN 2.0 is the second generation of the International Common Assessment of Numeracy tool, and ICARE is the International Common Assessment of Reading and Language. The reason we have come up with such an assessment is that this is now a paper-based common assessment of numeracy, language, and literacy, designed strictly for global discourse and education to report on SDG 4 and 1A, and is currently being prepared for 15 countries for rollout in early 2025. How these assessments fare together and what is the current status of assessments is that the PAL-ILANA measures children in the 4 to 10 age group, and it is an in-depth measure of numeracy, language, and literacy. When I say in-depth, this is because there are trade-offs between in-depth measures and kind of the scalability, and I'll come to that in a second. PAL-ILANA is designed in consortium between PAL Network, the Usher Center, or the Pratham Education Foundation, and the Australian Council for Educational Research, ACER. And a lot of work and years of development have gone into this tool. The ILANA item bank is then extended upon and used for ICAN 2.0 and ICARE, which then measures the exact same constructs in a very, very similar manner, but for the 5 to 16 age group. The age groups are different in that there is a different population that the assessment is administered to, but the construct is still exactly the same, and what we're measuring is still the same thing. ICAN 2.0 and ICARE are designed for scale at low cost, and that is where kind of these trade-offs come in. So ILANA is an in-depth measure of numeracy, language, and literacy, while ICAN and ICARE are designed for scale at low cost. The reason for this distinction is that there are trade-offs between the two. In-depth measures obviously provide a lot more data and a lot more location of children on the spectrum of learning, whereas they have the trade-off of being a lot more expensive and a lot more time-consuming as well. Whereas ICAN and ICARE are designed purely for scalability purposes, and so that we can go at nationally representative levels while maintaining the low-cost model. And so they'll provide less in-depth data on where children rank in terms of the different constructs, but just as important and just as aligned to the global proficiency framework. These are also designed in strict adherence to global reporting criteria, and ICAN 2.0 and ICARE also builds upon the PAL network's commitment to providing inclusive assessment data by incorporating supplementary modules for children with disabilities, for education and emergencies, and for socio-emotional learning. To find out more about any of these assessments, you can find more information on our website that also digs in deeper into what common assessments are, and especially looking at the PAL-ILANA and the ICAN and ICARE assessment provide wonderful case studies into how common assessments can vary and kind of what different portfolios we can offer. I hope that this module has been useful in learning about the citizen-led assessments and learning more about how you can conduct them in practice and learning more about what even variations within citizen-led assessments and common assessments you can have. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We would love to talk more. And thank you for participating in this module.